We're actually saying be less efficient, be less productive.
Well, yes, I think that that's absolutely right. But as a society, I mean, at the moment, we have to remember we're subsidising farmers to the tune of some £3 billion a year. But I don't blame them for the way they do things. What I do blame is the Common Agricultural Policy, which creates that financial climate. So what we've got to do is change that policy so that there's more incentive, not so much for intensive farming, but for a more environmentally farming. And my guess is that actually, if that did exist, many farmers would welcome it, and obviously conservationists would too.
We're trying to make a living farming on this very poor light land, but we try and leave room for wildlife.
Chris Knights farms 10,000 acres in Norfolk. He too relies on pesticides, but he believes it is possible to both farm efficiently and protect nature.
To a forester, this neglected woodland is a nightmare, but to blackcaps and great spotted woodpeckers and things, that's an ideal piece of habitat. We are quite an intensive farm, and we grow parsnips, carrots, salad onions, and quite a large acreage of lettuce. But we have wild areas right next door to it, like this. This was an old marl pit. That's super for willow warblers and the odd whitethroat and the linnet's nest. That's what gives the diversity to the whole farm, apart from the ground nest and birds, is that you've got all these neglected habitats, if you like. Look at these skylarks just hovering along this edge. And this great big wide bank was here when we took over the farm, and we've kept it here. A fantastic site for nesting partridges and pheasants and yellowhammers and linnets in these, like those gorse bushes. So they're like corridors all around the farm. They connect to wildlife, and when we have a crop which suits them, they just spread out into the field and actually nest away from these banks, and they'll nest all over, like in a parsnip crop when that's first drilled. That's quite common to find skylarks' nests there. On this polythene, the lapwing, although it doesn't look like there's room for them to nest, there is a couple of nests out there what we could just see, and this is an off-duty bird here at this moment, in time as the lapwing change over about every 50 or 70 minutes from the female sitting on the edge to the male taking over. That polythene is actually like its own little ecosystem under there, and although it's very dry at this point in time, it can be quite moist on some of these fields. When you go to pesticides, they take away the food plants for the insects, and a lot of the birds live on the insects. They live on the weed seed. This piece of set-aside, what we've done is left half and actually cultivated half, and that gives a great diversity of habitat. You'll get partridges and hares, which will actually have the leverets in this cover, and you can get the skylarks and lapwings what will nest on the cultivated part. This area has been a quick retreat, and we have a large population of hares. They like, this is really not winter barley, but that's drilled in the very late autumn time. That's a good habitat for the hares to be on. You can see us listening to us, but that's not responding at all. Sometimes when you're calling them like that, another hare or two will turn up what you haven't seen and come round from behind you.
Our wildlife has benefited, coincidentally, from a European policy aimed at reducing food mountains. Farmers are now paid for taking strips of land out of production. Known as set-aside, these uncommercial patches are proving, by default, to be a lifeline for many species.
One of the things a farmer can do to sympathetically manage his farm for farmland birds is to take care of his set-aside. And here's a very good example of a farmer who's got some set-aside that's being managed perfectly for farmland birds. It's 20 metres wide from the edge of the field into his crop, and he's planted it with oilseed rape. He planted it this time last year, and these plants grew, providing insects for farmland birds all through the summer. Over the winter, it stood and dropped all its seed and was very useful for farmland birds again, providing winter food. It's come up again this year, and as you can see already, the heads are covered in insects that will be used by farmland birds to feed their chicks.
Most farmers do not have the confidence today to farm without chemicals. They don't have the information they need, and they don't believe it's possible. What we've shown here at Eastbrook is that it is possible, that it's commercially viable, and that it's great for the environment.
In 1986, Helen Browning turned her land in Wiltshire over to organic farming. She uses no chemicals and says her farm is profitable. She rejects the idea that you can only compete in the big markets by using pesticides.
Basically, organic farming is about not using agrochemicals. That's very simplistic, but it does mean we have to go back to using traditional methods like rotations. It's usually a mixed farming system involving livestock as well as crops. We're using manures to fertilise the ground. We have to make sure that we look after our animals in a very appropriate way so that they don't get ill and don't need drugs. And so it's a way of making sure that our agriculture is sustainable as it's possible to be. The exciting thing about organic farming is that we're working with natural processes largely, rather than fighting against them. So, for instance, these broadleaf weeds in this crop here are actually useful to us because they will provide a habitat for predator insects, which will control our aphids when they come into the crop later in the season. And so, just as the bird life wants this weed to be here, so do I. That is a principle which has completely been forgotten about in conventional agriculture. Furthermore, I mean, the soil on an organic farm is always improving. It's always got more bacteria and bugs and invertebrates building up in it. And we've found that over the years, our yields are increasing. And the farm staff notice these things. They really do have noticed.
Well, I've been here 17 years, and I've seen commercial farming to organic farming. And I think the striking difference I've known is the bird population. The small birds, the goldfinches, the yellow hammers, chaffinches. You see them a lot more now than whatever you used to. And the birds of prey, there's a lot more of those about. You see them hovering in the middle of the field, where once upon a time it was just down the roadside, because we've stopped all the sprays and the artificials. I'm sure that's helped a lot.
One of the things that we've found at Eastbrook over the last 10 years is that the longer we farm organically, the higher our yields get. Farmers don't believe this until they see it in practice, but it's true, because the fertility of the soil is increasing all the time, the organic matter levels, the number of earthworms. So now I see organic farming as securing our future food supply. Unlike conventional farming, which is running into the buffers with soil erosion, problems of herbicide residues, yields are peaking in conventional systems, and I believe will at some stage start to drop. But organic farming is enabling the environment to supply us longer term without in any way damaging, in fact enhancing, our biodiversity.
If I were to be an organic farmer and other farmers with me, where would all the food come from? Because once upon a time we all were organic farmers. My dad was an organic farmer. Before the war, everybody was organic. And the wheat, where did that come from? Canada. And the meat, that came from Argentina. And we've now got 56 million people living on this island, and they all want food that's cheap and clean and good, and you simply can't do it. If you're organic, you can supply ladies who drive Volvos and read The Guardian with plenty of money in their back pocket. But organic food costs about 40% more than conventional food, and there aren't many people, other than the rich middle classes, who'd be prepared to pay that. So from economic grounds, I couldn't do it.
Two of the largest supermarket chains are having to import organic vegetables to meet the growing demand from their customers. So it may just be that we are turning to organic food.
I do buy organic vegetables because they're better for your health and they're not sprayed with pesticides. And I would like it if they stocked more in the shops generally.
I'd love to buy it if it was cheaper, but it's far too expensive really for students to buy.
Things like carrots, I would prefer to buy organic ones, but I just can't afford them all the time. Talking about 60 pence a pound rather than about 14 pence a pound.
Well, the main reason I buy organic vegetables is to health reasons, but I'm also quite concerned about environmental issues and the loss of wildlife through intensive farming.
I'm doing it for a selfish reason, I think, because I don't trust the people that make food. I don't trust what they say about a lot of things, and I like to try and eat healthily if I can do.
I want to support organic farmers. I want more farmers to start farming in a way that's not going to harm the environment or the people eating food.
But the fact is, however we look at it, we're not really reducing our use of pesticides, are we? And that's rather depressing, isn't it?
We have actually reduced the amount of active ingredient we're using on our crops by about 22% in the last 10 years, but so it is happening.
No, but let's be clear about that. That's the weight.
Mm-hmm.
That's only the weight. And actually what you're using is more active and powerful.
It is active in a different way. It is much, much more specific. And it is also, the products we're using today have been developed so that they don't have any effect on the non-target species or elsewhere in the environment.
And yet that is what's happening, isn't it? That the non-target areas, the birds, some of the other wildlife, are being affected. It may be your intention that they're not affected by pesticides, but that is actually what's happening, isn't it?
It has been happening, yes, but everybody is doing a lot, I think, now to try and improve the situation by giving a lot more advice on how to use the products much, much more skillfully and intelligently.
But farmers are businessmen, aren't they, really? So why is it in their interest to reduce the use of pesticides?
One of the areas that it does suggest here is introduction of incentive schemes for farmers in order to get them to farm in an environmentally friendly fashion. It also suggests the increased uptake of integrated crop management.
What do you mean by integrated crop management?
It's a sort of whole farm approach. It involves using rotations, it involves using varieties that are going to be resistant to pests and so on in order to reduce the chemical input. It involves working with nature rather than against it.
You're in the chemical industry. Surely it's in your interest for the farmers to keep buying chemicals.
That's probably rather a short-term view, and we're not a short-term industry. When you've spent £60 million to produce a product and spent 10 years, you really must stick with your market. You've got to recoup that money. Now, if the public is asking for products which are wildlife friendly, and your rivals develop it, and you don't, then you're out of business. That's a fact of life. So we must listen to what the customer wants. Otherwise, we're dead.
Are you saying that if the consumer says, we don't actually want crops grown with chemicals over a period of time, that's what's really going to change the industry?
I suspect we'll have to listen to that and adjust to it. Yes, indeed.
So over £3 billion of taxpayers' money is spent on agricultural subsidies in the UK each year, and what we have to do is to make sure that that provides food, cheap food, safe food, but also a healthy environment which is full of birds and other wildlife.
Within the framework that farmers have to operate, it's important that they're encouraged to think about minimising the use of pesticides, and when pesticide use is necessary, to think about minimising impact to the environment by using the right pesticide at the right time and in the right way.
If farmers can just give a little bit of their productivity to wildlife, things will get better.
I haven't come across a system of farming that reconciles the objectives of the environmentalists, of the food producer, of those concerned with health and with animal welfare in the way that organic farming does.
I'm optimistic about the future because I think the progress we've made with chemicals in the last 50 years will continue. They'll get better and cleverer and safer.
I'm reasonably optimistic about the future because at the end of this century there's going to be a major opportunity to reform the Common Agricultural Policy, and if we can take that opportunity and terminate the production subsidies and switch those into support for more wildlife friendly farming practices, then we could yet see a British countryside that is richer in a whole variety of animals and plants.
These latest reports, both anecdotal and scientific, pose a challenge not just to the farmer, but to us, the consumer. For it is clear that if we continue with our current system of food production, it will be at the expense of wildlife. But there are signs of new thinking, a growing recognition of the need to redirect subsidies towards more environmentally friendly farming. But for the moment, we're still playing at the edges. But if the spectre of the silent spring is to disappear altogether, it will be because we have learnt to reconsider the real price of cheap food and the cost to wildlife and our countryside.
The Natural History programme will be questioning whether the pesticides we use in our gardens are also contributing to the decline in the number of songbirds. That's on Friday morning at 11:30 on BBC Radio 4.